Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the true, gritty history of Captain John Smith. Now, we are going to completely separate the pop culture myth from the actual, highly complex historical man. So if you think you know his whole story just from the movies, well, get ready because you are definitely in for a surprise.
I mean, we all know the name, right? It's straight out of elementary school history, practically synonymous with the founding of early America. But who was the real John Smith? Was he this heroic explorer who bravely paved the way for English settlement? Was he just a notorious self-promoter who heavily exaggerated his own legend? Or was he something much more complex? Let's find out.
To get to the bottom of this, we'll trace his journey through 5 crucial phases. 1. Beyond the Disney myth. 2. Survival in Jamestown. 3. The Pocahontas encounter. 4. Mapping New England. And finally, 5. A self-promoting author.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Beyond the Disney Myth, the Mercenary.
Let's rewind way past Jamestown to look at his absolutely unbelievable life before he ever even set foot in the Americas. His pre-colonial life was honestly nothing short of wild. After leaving England around 1595, because being a merchant apprentice was apparently way too boring, he actually became a mercenary. He fought for the Dutch against the Spanish, dabbled in Mediterranean piracy, and by 1601 he was out fighting the Ottoman Turks in Transylvania. And get this, he famously killed and beheaded 3 Ottoman challengers in single combat duels. That actually earned him a knighthood and a coat of arms from the Prince of Transylvania. But his luck did run out in 1602. He was wounded, captured, and literally sold into slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Remarkably, though, he managed to take down his abusive slave master, escape into Russia, and trek all the way back across Europe, finally returning to England in 1604. I mean, this just perfectly illustrates the kind of hardened, battle-tested survivor Smith was way before he had ever even heard of the Virginia Company.
Moving on to Section 2, Survival in Jamestown, the Iron Fist.
So by 1606, Smith's craving for adventure pulled him into his next massive undertaking, joining the Virginia Company of London's expedition to colonize America for profit. Now, before Smith actually took the reins, the Jamestown colonists were completely unequipped for reality. They picked a terrible, swampy site, disease was running rampant, and over 60 of the original 104 settlers had died by September 1607. And to make matters worse, they were stubbornly obsessed with loading ships full of iron pyrite, literally fool's gold, instead of actually finding food. But then, after Smith took charge of the local council in 1608, the transformation was night and day. He brought in strict discipline, forced the gentlemen of the group to actually roll up their sleeves to farm and fish, fortified the settlement, and meticulously mapped out the surrounding Chesapeake Bay waterways. Looking at the results, it's absolutely clear that his iron-fisted leadership genuinely saved a doomed colony from totally collapsing.
Which brings us to his most legendary decree. He that will not work shall not eat. Borrowing a bit of wisdom from the biblical book of 2 Thessalonians, he delivered this uncompromising ultimatum to a group of starving, uncooperative settlers. Faced with the very real threats of mass starvation and mutiny, he forced them to drop the ridiculous search for fool's gold and focus entirely on actual, physical survival. It was pretty simple. If you wanted to share the colony's rations, you absolutely had to sweat for them.
Section 3, The Pocahontas Encounter, Myth versus Reality.
Okay, so it's his capture in December 1607 by the Powhatan Confederacy and his famous rescue that has sparked some of the most intense historical scrutiny out there. We really need to impartially weigh the evidence on both sides here. On one hand, skeptics point out a highly suspicious 10-year gap. You see, Smith didn't actually write about Pocahontas rescuing him from execution until 1616, in a letter to Queen Anne. Because of this, 19th century historians like Henry Brooks Adams straight up accused Smith of lying, suggesting he just invented the whole rescue to boost Pocahontas' image while she was visiting London. But, on the other hand, defenders like University of Delaware scholar Leo Leme argue that Smith's earlier writings were strictly geographical and ethnographic. They weren't personal memoirs at all, so he had no real reason to bring up the rescue earlier. Plus, LeMay notes that nobody in 1616 London, including Pocahontas, who was literally there, publicly questioned his story. And then you have modern scholars like Karen Kupperman, who suggest a really interesting middle ground, that Smith genuinely believed his life was in danger, but he was actually taking part in a Native American adoption and rebirth ritual that he just fundamentally misunderstood, rather than an actual execution.
So, what's the big takeaway here?
Well, regardless of whether it was a literal rescue from the brink of death, a misunderstood Powhatan adoption ritual, or just a heavily embellished memory, the historical outcome is exactly the same. This 1607 encounter temporarily secured a fragile peace and, most importantly, brought in absolutely vital food supplies for the English. Without that relationship, Jamestown almost certainly would have suffered the exact same fatal outcome as the lost Roanoke colony.
Let's look at Section 4, Mapping New England, a Vision Disrupted. In 1609, a severe and totally accidental gunpowder explosion in his canoe badly injured Smith, forcing him to head back to England, and he actually never returned to Virginia. Instead, by 1614, he shifted his focus entirely up north. He mapped the northern coast with really incredible precision and officially gave it the name New England, which is exactly the name the Plymouth colonists adopted years later. Now, Smith envisioned this thriving, sustainable region. He wanted to promote industries like fishing, farming, shipbuilding, and the fur trade. He even actively admired the French colonizers further north, noting how they had successfully established peace and a booming economy through intertribal fur trade networks. But his grand plans? Tragically ruined. Rogue English captains, specifically a guy named Thomas Hunt, completely undermined him. Hunt basically stayed behind and captured local Native Americans, including the famous Squanto, just to sell them in Spain as slaves for a few pieces of silver. Smith was absolutely furious. He realized this unbelievable greed completely destroyed the trust he was trying so hard to build, effectively ruining English trade relations in the area and stopping his own settlement plans dead in their tracks.
Finally, Section 5, a self-promoting author.
Grounded in London for the rest of his life, mostly due to a lack of financial backing and some really bad luck with pirates, Smith completely transformed himself from a rugged explorer into a masterful colonial promoter. The guy was incredibly prolific. He published 8 comprehensive volumes during his lifetime. These books detailed all of his wild experiences, provided incredibly accurate maps that people used for over a century, and honestly laid out both the harsh realities and the massive opportunities of the Americas. In a lot of ways, he was basically the very first public relations director for English America.
And his overarching marketing strategy was completely unique for the time. Unlike the Virginia Company, he wasn't sugarcoating the danger, and he definitely wasn't promising easy rivers of gold just to attract lazy gentlemen. He was fiercely honest about the hard work it would take. He was selling the prospect of true ownership, the idea that a person could master their own labor and land and actually achieve wealth through relentless industrial effort. It is, pretty much, an early articulation of what we now recognize as the American dream.
As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you to weigh the historical debate for yourselves. We've looked at his undeniable survival skills, his crazy time as a mercenary, his iron-fisted leadership that literally saved Jamestown, and his unquestionable flair for self-promotion. So, looking at all the evidence, how should we remember the real John Smith? Was he a visionary explorer who saw the true potential of the New World, a colonial exaggerator desperate to stay relevant, or is he inextricably both? Have a think about that. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the archives, and keep questioning the history you think you know.